a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy.
Jack Monroe. Jack Monroe is a British food writer, journalist and activist known for campaigning on poverty issues, particularly hunger relief. Monroe has published a blog, and several books of austerity recipes, and has campaigned alongside various British charity organisations. Monroe initially rose to prominence for writing a blog titled A Girl Called Jack, and has since written for publications such as The Echo, The Huffington Post, The Guardian, and The New Yorker. Monroe identifies as non-binary. Early life and career. Monroe was born in Southend-on-Sea to David Haji-Costas, MBE, and Evelyn Haji-Costas, a former nurse. Monroe's father is of Greek Cypriot heritage. He was in the British Army for 7 years and in the fire service for 30 years. He was awarded an MBE in 2007. Monroe has 3 siblings. Described as coming from a working-class background, Monroe passed the 11+ examinations and attended Westcliff High School for Girls, a grammar school in Westcliff-on-Sea, before leaving at age 16, bullied and disillusioned with insufficient GCSEs to progress to A-level. Monroe left home and began working in a chip shop, before going to work as a call handler for Essex County Fire and Rescue Service. After having a child, Monroe was unable to arrange the work around childcare responsibilities, and was unable to negotiate adjustments to their working pattern to make continued employment feasible. Monroe resigned the post after serving between 2007 and 2011. It was at this point they changed their name to Jack Monroe, Jack being short for Jack of all trades, the nickname. In an interview with The Telegraph, Monroe noted that M. Monroe is a bit of a handle. Monroe spent the following 18 months on benefits and looking for work, and moved from relative affluence to poverty and financial hardship. Monroe came to prominence in the media through writing the blog A Girl Called Jack, sharing cheap recipes created as a single parent with a young child, and aiming to provide family meals for less than £10 per week. In December 2015, the blog was renamed to Cooking on a Bootstrap. In 2012, Monroe became a weekly columnist for The Echo, a South Essex daily newspaper, and in February 2013, was taken on by the same as a trainee reporter. The timing was fortunate, as they were having difficulty affording nursery fees. Monroe was later retained as an unpaid columnist for the Huffington Post, before signing a publishing deal with Penguin Group. The book deal, reported as worth £25,000, resulted in housing benefit being cut off, and Monroe came close to being evicted, which led to moving into cheaper accommodation. Despite working every day, they were unable to make ends meet. By January 2014, finances had improved, and Monroe was able to move into a small 2-bedroom flat with their son. Monroe formerly wrote a twice-monthly food and recipe column for The Guardian, and additionally contributed a number of political columns, as well as being featured in The New York Times and The New Yorker. Monroe has written several budget cooking recipe books. In 2013, Monroe appeared in a 6-week advertising campaign for Sainsbury's supermarket. Monroe accepted the equivalent of the living wage for the 6 weeks that the campaign ran, and donated the remainder of the fee to charities, including a food bank. Speaking in 2014, Monroe described life as having changed beyond recognition, but said that they are still affected by their experience of poverty. The University of Essex announced in May 2015 that it would be awarding Monroe an honorary degree. Monroe appeared on BBC Television's late-night political programme This Week in June 2015. In 2015, Monroe won the Women of the Future award in the media category. They were surprised, saying, "I'm not sure I'll even be a woman in the future." The award was won after Monroe came out as non-binary, which created some controversy. The subsequent gender debate angered them. They questioned the headlines of some newspapers, and said, "Because of my trans identity, I'm attacked for accepting a real woman's award." Campaigning and politics. Monroe has been an active campaigner for a number of causes in the UK, particularly those concerned with poverty and hunger. Campaigning alongside organisations such as Unite, the Trussell Trust, Child Poverty Action Group, and Oxfam. Monroe was a supporter of the Labour Party, and appeared in a Labour campaign video in October 2013. They left the party in March 2015 after disagreeing with its rhetoric on immigration, and became a member of the Green Party of England and Wales. In November 2014, Monroe said on Twitter that David Cameron uses stories about his dead son as misty-eyed rhetoric to legitimize selling our NHS to his friends. The Daily Mail journalist Sarah Vine criticized Monroe for using the death of Cameron's son for political purposes and choosing a life of poverty. The Independent described this as a caustic attack, and Monroe replied on Twitter that the column was homophobic, transphobic, dead-naming, and ignorant. In April 2016, Monroe appeared online supporting the Women's Equality Party. Monroe intended to stand as a candidate for the National Health Action Party in the 2017 United Kingdom general election in Southend West, but withdrew after they received death threats and because they were dealing with health problems caused by arthritis. Personal life. Monroe is non-binary, and has spoken of beginning to identify as trans from an early age. Monroe kept their birth name while working at the fire service, concerned over the potential for dead naming and bullying in a not particularly tolerant organization. Not a great place to be gay, let alone genderqueer. They also did not take part in a fire service passing out ceremony, because protocol would have required them to wear a skirt. During this period, Monroe also had a brief relationship with a close male friend, which resulted in a son. On leaving the fire service, Monroe adopted the forename Jack. They began identifying to friends and family as a lesbian, and began a long-term relationship with a woman, which ended shortly after Monroe told their partner they were considering a mastectomy. Monroe was still careful at this point to downplay any suggestions of gender ambiguity, and in an interview in February 2014 described themselves as a lefty, liberal, leisure cook, who had reassured their parents that they identified as female. "I was like, no, I'm a little bit tomboyish, a little bit butch, but I have no immediate plans to transition." Monroe publicly came out as non-binary in October 2015. In 2013, Monroe was ranked number 19 in The Independent on Sunday's Pink list of influential LGBT people in the United Kingdom. In 2014, it was reported that Monroe and their son were living with Monroe's then-girlfriend Allegra McEvedy and McEvedy's daughter in London. The relationship ended in October 2015. Legal action. Monroe initiated legal action in 2015 after the Daily Mail claimed that Jack was not their real name, and has requested that their birth name not be used by the media. In 2017, Monroe won a libel case against newspaper columnist and television personality Katie Hopkins, after Hopkins suggested on Twitter that Monroe was supportive of vandalism of a war memorial, having confused Monroe with journalist Laurie Penny. Instead of apologizing, Hopkins then labeled Monroe social anthrax. The High Court awarded Monroe £24,000 in damages plus costs.
Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?